a look.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tokimaru, and I'm here to have a look at Chimera Circuit. No, you're not mistaken. This is how the game looks for me. I will be explaining this momentarily, but first I'd like to describe what the game is. This is a game by a solo indie developer by the name of BLYTHE. From what I can tell, this is the first game they published, and because of that, I was initially willing to overlook this. This is how the game launched when I first booted it up, and I was like, oh, you know, they're a solo developer, so maybe it's okay. I understand that sometimes it can be difficult to catch every single bug that comes your way. However, not only does this happen every single time I launch the game, it also happens when I press certain menu options, and I will get into that in a second. This is a creature collecting racing game, very, very reminiscent of recent smash hit Uma Musume, and also Monster Rancher. Typically, I'd like to describe Uma Musume to people as Monster Rancher, except it's for racing instead of fighting. And that generally gets the idea across because there's a lot of similarities. This game takes a lot of what Uma Musume does and adds a few things that are more reminiscent of Monster Rancher specifically. So I'll be comparing this to those two games as we go through it. But first, let's jump into the options menu. So the only way I found to fix this was to drag or click the edge of the window, and then I have to click the full screen windowed option. There's no real full screen. This game doesn't have proper full screen in it, so this is the best you're gonna do, especially because, as you'll see in a moment, it continues to turn into a half window. Let's jump into the options menu here. So here are our resolution options. Every time I click a resolution option, it does this, and I have to drag it back in order to actually get it to, in order to actually get the window options to be visible on screen. I will return this to my native resolution. I'm going to click that again. I'm going to go into full screen. I'm going to go to my volume sliders. Oh, what's that? Clicking the volume slider actually breaks the window, prompting you to have to fix it every single time you go through one option on the volume slider. So adjusting your music and sound effects volume requires you to jump through a billion hoops in order to get it to the actual levels that you want. And in addition to that, if I return to the main menu, which of course it does this, you may notice that my volume sliders were initially set to 10. That is the volume that I was playing the game at previously. It doesn't properly save your volume. So if you set your volume previously and then you close the game, it is going to return at maximum volume. And I haven't found a way to fix that. I'm going to take a second to adjust the volume because there is actually some pretty good music in this game that I want you to hear eventually. Continuing through our journey through the options menu that will take us 1,000 years, this game also has filters. It is a pixel art style game, and therefore they must have a CRT filter. Oh, what's that? The CRT filter also breaks the window. Lovely. So I've run into a few issues with the filters. In addition to the CRT filter, there are like 50 other filters that do different kinds of things. I haven't had the heart to actually look through all of them and test them out individually because doing so would require me to navigate this awful menu. Sorry, I'm getting quite perturbed. Would require me to navigate this awful menu and adjust my window every single time I want to pick one of these options. So to show you the CRT filter, it does have a few problems. It obviously doesn't emulate the true visual effect of a CRT filter. It's a couple of scan lines. It doesn't properly distort the pixels. I played a few games before where it does that a little bit better. I'm okay with a CRT filter that isn't particularly realistic. That's not actually that big of an issue. I do have a very minor complaint about this. So you may notice there's a little bit of screen distortion, which is nice. Unfortunately, it seems that when you reach the edge of the screen, on all edges, there's a little bit of distortion on your cursor. So it feels like they didn't properly test out the way the filters work on all resolutions. There was another one. Let me try to find it. This is extremely bothersome. Is this the one? Yes, this is the one. So with this filter, the screen also loops from top to bottom, which ends up being a little bit weird. It seems to only be a problem with high resolutions. So I would recommend testing that out to the developer. Testing that out before releasing the game. But yes, as you can see, every time we fiddle with any of the options in this menu, it breaks the entire screen. And I'm going to go ahead and leave the options menu. I'm going to save changes, and we're good. That's all. Additionally, another minor complaint I have is that the volume sliders go only in intervals of 10. I feel like if you're going to do this style of volume slider, so first of all, I recommend them actually be sliders instead of menu options, but that's not too big of a deal here. My real complaint is that they're only in intervals of 10, and you can't adjust them any further. There's no granularity, which sort of defeats the purpose of it. I feel like you don't need to display it in intervals of 10. Just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instead of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. It's rather pointless. But other than that, this is mostly entirely a 2D pixel art game, so there isn't that much need for greater graphical options. The real problem is just the fact that the window breaks every time I do something. So now we can get to the actual game. Allow me to return to a different recording style. All right, I have adjusted the way I'm recording my screen, so even if this screen does break, it's not going to mess with the video. So like I said, this is a game that's very similar to Uma Musume and Monster Rancher. It is a game where you breed and collect creatures and enter them into races. So over here, we have a codex of all the different kinds of creatures we can have. At the very beginning of the game, you only have access to these 3 horses. It is based off of a horse racing game, and therefore your basic creatures are going to be horses. Now, when I started the game initially, it popped up with a tutorial. There was a tutorial at the beginning of the game that explained specifically what the purpose of each of these stats were. And because I played Uma Musume before, I have a generally good idea of how the stats should be working in this game. Unfortunately, because of the way the screen breaks, it launched like that. I had no idea how to fix it. I skipped through the tutorial, absorbing what I could, and it's completely gone. I believe if I actually enter a career, let me do this for a second. Oh yes, I do have a few more complaints about that. It doesn't actually tell me anything about what these stats do anywhere, unfortunately. So this game does suffer from a lack of general either A, tutorializing. It did have a little bit of a tutorial at the beginning of the game, but because of the way the game launched, I had trouble following it. So B, it would be lovely if there were tooltips in this game. Hover over tooltips. Very useful for very information-heavy games like this, where you're going to be counting a lot of different kinds of stats that affect different things. Or C, an encyclopedia. It would be nice if there was an encyclopedia where I could actually go through and find out what all these specific stats do. We have a pasture where I have some of my previous horses that I played with. The codex only tells you what the creature is. It doesn't tell you anything about it doesn't tell you anything about the specific stats. So that is another thing I would recommend. Something, literally anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be either tooltips or an encyclopedia. It could be when we're in a career, it just says what each of the stats does there, and then you wouldn't have to do that much additional work. But here are the 3 basic horses. Each of them have 2 abilities, and I will go over abilities in a little bit when we enter the game, but when we actually enter the career, we can either clone a previous creature, basically trait for trait, stat for stat, or what we can do is we can splice them. This is the other main component of this game, where you're encouraged to collect different kinds of monsters. Right now we only have horses, like I said, but later on you can collect other different kinds of creatures. Unfortunately, I've actually had trouble finding the different kinds of creatures that you can collect, but there is a way built into the career for you to be able to do that. But here's the other part of the game where you splice your creatures together. You have a father, and you may have noticed when I created a new career and I cloned, I had the option to make it male or female. From what I understand, I believe you can only breed a male with a female. So this is a previous horse that I've had named Horsey Boy. I believe this is a male, and this is a female Golshi. This is Golshi. You can only breed a male with a female. So when you're initially playing the game and you're prompted to choose either male or female when you're basically creating a new creature rather than splicing a creature, you should be wary of whether it's going to be male or female, because you're going to want to breed certain creatures with other creatures in order to combine their different abilities. So let's just start by cloning a new creature. We are going to make a thoroughbred, high speed, mid stamina, high potential, low power, low tech, low wealth. And those, I will explain those in a moment. We will make this a male. We are going to call them John Smith. Oh yes, this was another strange issue I had with this. For some reason, capitals are lowercase and lowercase are capitals. So if I'm not pressing shift or using caps lock I believe doesn't actually even work in this game. So if I'm not holding shift, we have all capital letters, but if you are holding shift, then we have all lowercase letters, which is really annoying when you're, used to typing basic English. So you wanna not be pressing shift, and then you have to hold shift to actually be able to use lowercase letters. It's very, very bizarre. I've never seen this happen before. We're going to call this horse John Smith. And this is how the game begins. So much like Monster Rancher or Uma Musume, you are basically going throughout you have races that are going to take place throughout the year, and it's your job to train up their stats in order for you to be able to compete in them properly. So we can do any of these things. First of all, we can look at their stats. Like I said, unfortunately, there aren't any tooltips or anything, but I can explain to you basically how these things should be working. Speed is the maximum speed that your creature can reach during a race. Stamina is basically like a health bar. They eventually get tired when they lose stamina. There's an additional use for stamina that I'll go into once we get into the race, because it differs from Uma Musume. In Uma Musume, you are watching the race happen, and the stamina is basically a bar that goes down throughout the race. Stamina does something really interesting. Power is a mix between how it works in Uma Musume, where you're using power to accelerate during the race. It's not, speed is basically the top speed you go, and power is basically the rate at which you accelerate up to top speed. But additionally, creatures can actually fight and ram into each other during the race. And this affects what happens when you or another creature rams into each other. Tech, I believe, is also... Well, now I've forgotten, unfortunately. I believe that's also about ramming into other things. This might refer to course obstacles or turf, because there are different kinds of turf that you can have during a race. Will, I've completely forgotten what will does. This might be like wit in Uma Musume. And then potential is how well your horse trains. And here we have our 2 skills. What's interesting about this game is skills are actually usable during the race, which we'll see in a moment. So we can either race, which obviously you don't want to race until you've trained. We can train, which will boost one of our many stats. Oh yeah, this actually does give a very short description here. I do remember this now. I would appreciate longer tooltips or an encyclopedia. But additionally, we can go to the shop. We can buy items using this. Using our currency, which I forget what it's called, to buy things that allow us to basically boost our horse or give us an advantage or punish opponents during the race. This is much more like Monster Rancher. Monster Rancher actually does have a shop. And Uma Musume does not. You're basically just training your horse during Uma Musume. So like I said, this is a little bit closer to how Monster Rancher does things, but it does still take a lot of inspiration from Uma Musume because they are... It's a racing game and not a fighting game. So I'm going to go ahead and train my horse. You can either train them normally, or you can use your dust. That's what it is. You can spend your dust to do a pro training. Speed is increased by 10. I'm just going to, for now, train speed 3 times. I'm going to do normal training. That gives us 5 because we did normal training instead of big training, and we're going to increase that by 5. And we're done training. We can't train anymore. At the start of the game, you get 3 little pips on your little whip meter, which determines how many times you can train before you have to race again. And after you race, you get different amounts of whips back depending on your placement. So now that we're done training, we're going to go into the shop. We're going to look at things. So the cage is actually how you unlock new species. Unfortunately, because of the way that the gameplay works and the way that it sort of ramps up in difficulty, I found myself not able to actually go out of my way to purchase the cages because you need to spend dust to support your horse or do one other thing. And it's difficult to get the dust back if you don't actually win, and it can be hard to understand the optimal ways that you can get back dust when you first play the game. And it doesn't really, the game doesn't really go out of its way to help you figure that out. So the cage is how you unlock new beasts. I haven't had the chance to do that yet. We have Glimmer Dust, temporary plus potential this phase. Unfortunately, I already trained without looking at this. If I was being strategic, I would have looked at the shop first and bought this before training, which would help me train. Larval Zim, cost 200, plus 10, lowest stat next race. That's probably okay. That leaves us with 200 dust, and now we have nothing left to do here, so it's time to race. So, like I said, this takes after Uma Musume, or just generally horse racing in general. So it uses terms like maiden race, non-graded. We have G3, G2, G1. Very, very similar to Uma Musume. I don't know if I would say it's directly inspired, but it's definitely inspired by horse racing in general. So we have 3 choices in races we can do. Obviously, we want to do maiden race first, because this is our first race. These other ones are obviously going to be a lot more difficult. Unfortunately, the game, so like I said, the game doesn't go out of its way to really explain a lot of things. There are no tooltips, there's no encyclopedia. What is a maiden race? If you're not already familiar with Uma Musume or horse racing in general, and you're just interested in this monster breeding game, I don't know. What is non-graded? What is G3, G2, G1? Are those harder? Can I do them right now? There's no way to know unless you just do them and then you lose and say, well, I don't know why I lost there. This game really suffers from a lack of explanations, like I said. So here we have our choice of 3 races. We have Nest Rise, which is at night. It's 1,200 meters. It has forested terrain. This has cloud and colorful terrain. It takes place during the day. They all have different attributes, and different creatures and different abilities work well with different kinds of terrain. So I'm going to take a look at my stats again. Speed, stamina, efficient, plus 15% speed if pace plus 2 or more, drain stamina 10 or more. Okay, so I'm going to get into something in a minute, but let's start by looking at the description of these races. So when you select one of these races, you have the sort of commentator tell you about things that are going to affect your creature during that race. So Foggy Night visibility is awful, speed and technique is awful. Speed and technique both down 10%. May I just say, okay, I've sort of been avoiding talking about this. The font in this game is extremely difficult to read in many circumstances, especially with the very small font in certain places. So in here and then during the race as well, there's even smaller font. I do like the font. It's extremely difficult to read when it's not blown up and large like this. And it's even worse when you're using the CRT filter. I ran into that problem a lot when I was testing out the CRT filter initially. So it's not just difficult to read for me. Like, I can deal with, it's kind of hard to read, but maybe some people might be fine with it. For accessibility purposes, I think it's generally better to have even if it's not accessibility, even if it's not a dyslexia-friendly font, I would recommend a generally more readable font, simply for accessibility purposes. But Foggy Night visibility, awful. Speed and technique both down 10%, plus nights, 5% tech slip and extra drain. So that's on that one. And we have different descriptions for all of these. Worst guys today, no extra hurdles raises. So I want to go for this one because it's not going to affect me that much, with the exception of specific terrain, but I don't have any abilities or skills that are related to that terrain. So this part is actually very interesting, because I remember when Uma Musume launched their global version, the Japanese version had been out for a while and it was very popular. When Uma Musume initially launched their global version, a lot of people were like, oh, it's horse racing. You're gonna be betting on the horses. There's horse betting, right? In horse racing, you bet on the horses. It's gambling, you gamble on the horses. And that's not the sort of game it is. It's not that kind of game. It's basically just an auto battler. Gambling is completely irrelevant to that game. But in this game, it does actually have betting, and this is one of the main ways for you to get your dust count higher. Unfortunately, it's a little difficult to sort of gauge who you want to bet on, because you can actually bet on anybody here. You can bet on any of the racers, including your own horse. You can bet on whether or not they'll win, and you can bet on whether they'll win, place, or show. So I'm going to start by betting on my own creature. Win, place, or show, I'm going to bet 100. Unfortunately, I can't press enter. Oh, I can press. Oh, yeah, that's why. You can't press enter to complete that, but you can press enter to start the race. So here's how it goes. The creatures go on their own. It doesn't, I don't know what the status is because there aren't any tooltips. You can adjust your pace, but the problem is, so first of all, adjusting the pace basically means you're adjusting where your creature is going to try and be during the race. Unfortunately, it seems I've had difficulty understanding how the bar works, because when you do certain things or when certain things happen to your creature, it automatically adjusts the bar and you have no way of actually accounting for that. And I've had difficulty actually figuring out how that works. So everything just happened there on its own. I didn't get to explain one other part of this, but everything happened on its own. Much like Uma Musume, it's a horse racing game. You're just training your creature and letting it run during the race. We managed to get third. I didn't get to explain one thing, but next race I will get into that. And we've won 300 dust. I don't know how much of that was from betting. I don't get to actually see. Oh yeah, here it is. You won your bet. You were in 150. I don't actually get to see the middle racer because the window doesn't change. But you may also notice I got whips in addition to that. So here is something interesting. Intermittently, after races, ooh, sorry about that. Intermittently, after races, you'll be presented with 3 options. These are either going to be buffs for you, or debuffs for your opponent, or in this case, you get debuffs for you and buffs for your opponents. I have no idea what prompts, whether or not these are going to be good or bad for you. Initially, I thought it was, well, if you lose a race really badly, they're going to give you a bunch of debuffs. But sometimes you just win a race and come in first, and you still get debuffs. And sometimes you lose a race really badly, and you still get buffs. And I was also thinking that maybe it was like, oh, well, after certain races, you'll always get certain results. But no, sometimes after my first race, I get debuffs. Sometimes after my first race, I get buffs. Sometimes I only get buffs for an entire run. And I have no idea what prompts this, but it feels really bad when randomly after a race, you just get a whole bunch of debuffs. So I have to try and pick which one of these is best for me. And there's an interesting voice effect. So you may have noticed the game overall has a very creepypasta vibe to it. Everything's in black and white. You have a lot of strange looking creatures. Everything's a little bit haunting. It's very peculiar. I'm not sure it's necessarily my jam, but it is an interesting take. So whenever we hover over one of these, or whenever we click one of these to take a look at it, our little commentator says something in a creepypasta voice. Opponents start with +1 mood. L. Bets on underdogs plus fave give -20% dust if placed top 3. Start races -1 grid position. I feel like this one affects me the least as long as I simply make good bets. And you don't necessarily have to bet, but it's, like I said, it's difficult for you to get dust back if you don't bet, but it can be hard to gauge how you should be betting in this when you have no idea what's going on in the game and they don't explain anything. So I'm gonna start by taking a look at the shop. Larval Zim, plus low stat. Gamble item, high payouts. Syringe, +1 train. I'm going to use this. We're going to get some more training. So now we have 4 out of 5 total training sessions. So I'm going to do a little bit more training. I'm going to do a little bit of speed training. We're going to do 2 of those. I'd like to get a little bit of strength training or power training. Reduces knockbacks and impacts. Yeah, okay, wait. Okay, so in this, speed boosts acceleration, and then this is just for combat. This is resisting fear, stun, panic, and nerve-based effects. So, like I said, it is also a little bit more of a combat game than something like Uma Musume, so there's a little bit of combat in this. We'll slow stamina drain. We'll do a professional train for this one, and it's going to be the end of our training session. I'm gonna take a look at my stats. My horse is a little bit injured. They are a little bit sad. Other than that, we seem okay. So I understand how Uma Musume works in terms of its stats. I think it's difficult to tell what stat number we should be expected to be at per race. Like, it doesn't tell me what if a number is like good or bad. Like, obviously 50 is a much higher number than 10, but it's like, is it okay if I only have 10 of a stat? It would be nice to simply know the general idea of how they want you to sort of spread your stats. So I'm going to go into another race. Okay, we're going to take a look at these. Running date, speed draws 5%, stamina drains. Like clear, but shadows play tricks, technique slips, and stamina drains. Let's go for the Dino Pit here. And I am going to bet all of my dust on my horse. We are going to go for 250. So don't click enter. Turns out that just starts the race. We want to place our bet here. Oh wait, that does start the race. Okay, you can only make one bet. So here is another part of the game that I didn't get to explain last time. We actually have proccable skills or usable skills in this game. I'm going to use Equine Gallop. It's going to spend 2 of my little stamina pips here. It's going to say that I'm using it. So I did run into a problem. I don't understand why, but sometimes when I try to click a skill that I can spend stamina on or my pips on. So you see I have 2 here and Equine Gallop costs 2. Even if I click it, it doesn't seem to use it. And I don't know why. I can't tell. See, my sprint, I can't use my sprint and I don't know why. Because if you do use a skill, it drains it out. You play second. Awesome, I did it. Good job, me. But sometimes it doesn't let me use my skill and I have no idea why. Even though I have the points to pay for it, it doesn't let me use my skill. It doesn't explain anything. It doesn't say when my skill start. It does say when your skill starts. It doesn't say when my skill ends. It feels like like I said, there's just a general lack of information that overall I think should be provided to help players understand just how to play the game. I don't think every game needs to reveal everything, because some games it's cool to discover new things, but when you don't understand how the game should be played, not what specific things you want to be doing, but the overall idea of how the game should be played, it makes it really, really difficult to actually bring new players in. Don't start with -1 mood. So these are the good runes, by the way. I don't know what procced whether or not they were good or bad runes, but they are good runes. Training gains plus 50% if mood greater than 0. That seems nice. Bought items regenerate. Ooh, that also seems nice. I want to go with this one. We're going to jump into the shop. I'm going to buy +1 training. I'm going to look at this. Gambling item, high payouts. Sure, why not? I don't know what that does. Or, oh wait, gambling item, high payouts. Oh, I think it means when I gamble, I get a higher payout. Okay, so let's slow our stamina drain, because I think we do like our stamina. Terrain penalty, and we'll boost this, because I think our speed is actually really good right now. So we're gonna boost potential a little bit, or tech, sorry. We're going to boost tech a little bit. So it all seems good to me. And I'm going to jump into a race that I think looks okay. This is probably fine, right? And I'm going to bet all of it on me. 275. We're going to go. And I'm going to attempt to use my skills. So I'm going to click this. It's going to immediately drain 2. That means I've used it. I think the symbols tell me when my thing ends. So like the fast foot symbol meant my thing ended. I'm going to try to sprint here. So it did spend there. And my pace is like automatically changing. So even if I raise it up, it brings it all the way back down sometimes. Like I said, things tend to happen in this game. They tend to happen or not happen the way you expect, and it doesn't really explain why. The only thing this tells you is when people are using abilities, when they're hitting each other, and I believe that's it. It just tells you when they're triggering the traits. It tells you when they ram into each other. And other than that, I have no idea why certain things are happening the way they are. But I did manage to get second there, which is pretty good.
Yes.
This appears to be bad. -1 life. Races orbs regenerate 15% slower. That seems really bad. More enemy generated chimeras are generation 2. That seems scary. So that seems like they're going to give me enemies that are bred. So what you want to do, I'm going to do -1 life. Okay. So I'm probably going to stop there. But after you're done, after you end a career, whether you lose or finish a career, I haven't figured out how you actually finish a career. Because in something like Uma Musume, each character basically has their own story mode that they go through. So you have a certain amount of specific races that you have to get through, where you have to reach certain placements in certain races or reach specific goals. And then you get to the end of the story, and then that's it. I don't think I've reached the end of a career other than by losing. So I don't know what the actual goals of this game are other than win races. I don't know when I should be going to bigger races, because I've tried a few times on previous horses and I immediately lost. Like, even after winning 10 maiden races in a row, when I tried a non-graded race, I came in dead last and basically lost every single time. So it's hard to know like when you're actually ready for things, because the game, like I said, it doesn't tell you what the expected stat spread should be. It doesn't tell you generally how good is 10, how good is 50. I assume 50 is good, but maybe 50 is only good because I've been doing the baby races, and I don't know what the general threshold for non-graded races are. I don't know how many months I have until the end of the career. I don't know how many years I have. I don't know if there are specific types of big races I should be looking for, like in both Monster Rancher and Uma Musume, they have specific races or tournaments happening at specific times during the year. It doesn't really tell me. These all seem like they're randomly generated. It doesn't tell me anything specific about them. They just give you 3 random races in each category and throws you to the wolves, or in this case, to the chimeras. But after you complete a career, you can send your creatures to the pasture and where they'll stay, and based on their stats, you can start a new career. I'm going to delete this career. You can start a new career where you splice your 2 creatures together, and it will inherit. I don't know how it works in terms of inheriting stats and abilities. I believe we're going to call this Jane Horse. And again, we have the awful capitalization. And I believe they get 1 ability from each parent. I don't know how it determines which one is which. It probably has to do something with the male and female, but that's the general expected gameplay loop. You run your career, you get your stats up, you unlock new creatures for your codex so that you can breed better chimeras. Now, this game is about $10 on Steam. And like I said, it has a lot of technical issues with it, has a lot of issues with clarity, but I do just generally like the gameplay loop of games like Uma Musume and Monster Rancher. I like the gameplay loop of this. The problem is it's so difficult to get into because of how obtuse it is with its overall information and how the systems actually work and interact with each other. It's, unless you've already played a game like Uma Musume or Monster Rancher, which is how I'm able to sort of get into the flow of the game so quickly, is that, you know, I played Monster Rancher and Uma Musume. I like those games, I get it. So it's easy for me to get the general gist of how things work. But for someone that's never played a game like that and is interested in getting into one, despite the fact that I abhor Uma Musume's tutorial, I think it has one of the worst tutorials ever. It just has a billion terms in its manual that doesn't explain anything very well. It does more tutorialization and overall presents the information to you in a much more condensed and easier to digest way than this, which gives you nothing at all, which is unfortunate. Because like I said, it just makes it very hard to get into unless you already know what you're doing. And on top of that, we have the bugs with the way the screen works. So it's really hard for me to actually recommend this game, despite the fact that I do think it's fun. I do think it's an enjoyable game once you actually get into it and once you actually know what you're doing and you're breeding different creatures and you're actually winning races, you're understanding where you should place your bets. It's just really hard, especially for $10. My name has been Tokimaru. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.